Okay, so I'm doing a video to look at this weekly supply on euro yen and how I would go about zooming in and finding the relevant decision point zones, i.e. pockets of supply within that weekly supply, and then looking at the potential price action I would use to actually get into a trade. So obviously if we start with the weekly time frame, zoom in a bit, this high and that low and that kind of immediate retest area defines that supply. You can see where price left this area with strong momentum. So this is how you would define it on the weekly. Now I'm not going to obviously be too fussed about how I mark it in because I'm going to refine it as I zoom in. So I'm basically got thick blue lines, that high, that decision point low there, and that's pretty much it. And then I'm just going to start zooming in. So daily. Again, it comes slightly clearer in terms of the source of the move from up there. We can see this whole area has history along here, so it makes sense that this defines the edge of the demands and the supply zone. But what I'll also notice is we've got this pause, which is reaction obviously to form of supply within here becomes demand. We've had a kind of DBD form within there, but before we having the real momentum breakout, we've had momentum consuming this decision point below there, but then we've paused and then we've had another area, another strong move down. So have to be wary that even though this might be the crux of the zone, there's obviously still a clear untested supply within here that price could react at. So I'm not that fussed about marking the zone edges as such. I'm more fussed about marking decision points and decision point zones where price left with good momentum that are untested, which are in the proximity of this weekly area. So I wouldn't dismiss that just because it's below this area, because that is still just as valid an untested supply as this area within here, and it's certainly the next untested supply above above this area on this time frame. That's what it looks like anyway. I'm only going to zoom into H1 because I haven't got any data below there. And to be honest, I'm not, I certainly wouldn't go into M1 on a 2009-10 weekly supply. I'm not going to pinpoint it to that degree of accuracy because it just won't be that accurate because it's so far in the past and you're going from weekly down to M1. I'm more interested in the actual main supply pockets around H1 when I'm looking at weekly zone where I expect price to react from, where to look for price action trades from, rather than pinpointing exact decision points like I would if I was looking at like an M50 and M30 chart. I'd look at M1 to try and pinpoint the exact decision point within a very fine pip range. But on a weekly zone, obviously, I'm not going to do that. So I can only go down to H1 anyway, but that suits me fine. So now if we go down to H4. Now I haven't marked up anything on this time frame yet. I won't do it. I'll mark up on H1, but we can see clearly we have the real source of the move there. We do have, like, obviously this is the edge of the zone, but the more immediate interest is this source here. You can see then we've got a DBD there, we've got a DBD there, and that was this whole big history in terms of the former demand, and you can see we've had the immediate retest as well to confirm this is a very clear decision point. And you can see we kind of meandered down, and then this is where this is like the whole DBD, the daily time frame DBD, and this is where price continues with the next momentum. So you can see the actual breakout momentum wasn't that good from this area, and especially when this looks pretty compressed along there. That's actually not a very good momentum breakout. Whereas this move down here, and then obviously compared to these ones down there, that's the actual start of the actual main breakout, the actual momentum, which is an important point to note. So even though this is obviously a very clear area, I certainly wouldn't dismiss this as still, because this is where actually price started to move with some decent momentum relative to the breakout here, and it's an untested supply, and the next untested supply in the vicinity of this weekly supply above where price was at the time of print. I started looking at this last week. Okay, so that's the H4. So lastly H1. See, my chart's going to get an absolute mess when you do stuff like this, but that's part and parcel of it. So that would be moved down to there. So again, the way I look at things is I'm more concerned with the most recent price action history. Yeah, I know that's a reaction to supply within. Yeah, I know that's a reaction to ignore demand within there. That's a reaction. That's just a retest of this whole broken form of demand and reaction to demand within here. And this is a retest of that area. I'm not overly focused what something is a retest of. I'm more focused about what happened last time price left this area. How did it move? If it moved with good momentum, then I don't care if it's a retest of something, as long as it's not like sixth time back or something silly like that. But strong momentum tells us it likely has a strong supply-demand imbalance. So it doesn't matter if it is a retest or somewhere, because price supply and demand isn't static, it is dynamic, so it can get stronger within an area rather than weaker. Okay, but normal common sense logic tells us obviously the more times an area is hit, the weaker it becomes. But it's not set in stone, and we're more talking about fourth, fifth, sixth time back rather than the second touch of an area. If price moves away from this area with great momentum, then as far as I'm concerned, that's new supply. That's still good supply. Okay, so that is a retest of this area here, but the momentum breakout is very strong. You can see the decision point marking its edge along here. So that for me is the main source of supply. We have a source up here, but this is the main source of supply I would be interested in. But obviously there's plenty of other supply zones below there that price might turn at first. So it's just one what I call decision point zone within the weekly supply. Now this one this is obviously a nice reaction to the ignore demand down there. So that's a obviously clear source of supply within there. And if you zoomed in, I'm sure you'd find a DBD or RBD up here. But obviously we have our decision points at the edge of this area, so again I would mark that as one clear zone. And the next one as well, this is obviously when we get into the edge of that major form of demand and the immediate retest, which you can see this is just a reaction to the breaking of this clear SR or demand zone. So this is another DBD, and also we use the retest to confirm the decision point at the edge. And then you've got this whole very messy area, but this is obviously where price started to move with momentum when it kind of got below this area. You can see the liquidity spike reversal here, and that stands out. So I've marked that, and this is not a textbook zone as such, but I'm looking at how price left this area in terms of the liquidity spike reversal. It's certainly, until above here, it's the next strongest area. This is all a bit messy, but obviously we've got clear decision points within this area. So that to me, it's not a textbook zone where you're marking edges of zones as such, but that stands out to me, and I've got to be wary of starting to look too low, too far below price. And so this is, I mean too far below the actual zone, because obviously you're starting to get a whole new different weekly daily zone then. So this for me is the start of all these moves. This liquidity spike reversal is the start of all these moves. It's the next area that price starts to move with momentum, but we have decision points up here. So I'm kind of going to mark that as a zone, but you have to appreciate obviously it's not like a clear RBD like here or clear DBD within here, but it's just marking up the what seem like key decision points. So that's key to me, and then obviously these ones stand out easily, and then you've got this where price found demand here. So I'll just mark that as the edge of this kind of zone. But really what I'm expecting, if I got on the first time back to this area on the weekly time frame, I think you should be able to look at that and say, where should you expect reaction? I don't expect price to get back up there, unless unless the buying strength is really strong and we just slowly consume all the supply within here. I don't really expect the reaction here, and I actually don't like price coming up here, because my style is to zoom in and find PA. So I'll be zooming in. I won't be looking at a weekly time frame to find PA. I'd be zooming in. So I don't want price reacting up here, because then you've got the problem of you've got lots of form of supply turn demand that needs consumed. So the chances of finding actually a good value entry are much lower than if price reacts at the edge of a zone, because then you've got more clear space below. So I would look at this, and I would say that actually I expect price to react within. I haven't drawn that very well. Let me draw it again. Within this whole area. This is where price left with good momentum. Within this whole zone, as I said before, on the higher time frame, but this was also a very key break, very key demand break along within within that area. Ignore that arrow. Within that area. So really, if this weekly demand kind of area is relatively strong, I would expect some sort of reaction within this overall zone. Okay, so I've marked them all up. Yeah, it's messy, but you know that's the nature of trading. Now, in terms of looking at the PA, I am a short-term trader, so I'm not going to obviously look for weekly PA. And if you're looking at weekly zone, then obviously it makes sense to zoom in as far as you can to find the best value entry and stop loss. But with a weekly zone, for example, I'm not going to zoom in and look at M1 PA because that's just going to be far too messy. It's going to be around M15 to H1, that kind of area. Whereas if I look at H1 or M30 or M15 as a higher time frame, then I'm going to be looking at M1. So I don't want to zoom in too much because you're going to cloud the overall picture. But I kind of just want to look at sort of M15 to H1. M15 is my favourite time frame when I'm looking at higher time frame stuff. M15 for the PA. So what I'll do now is if I zoom back. Now if I go to H1 first, now you can see where price did react. If I just look at that first, it reacted within that lower zone, and this was the overall zone I said I expect to hold, or expect to have some sort of reaction at. Depending on the buying strength, depends on how and the strength of this supply depends on obviously how much reaction we get. Okay, but now I'm focused on looking more at the thought process I would go through as price approaches. So what I'm looking at is obviously this is where I'm first going to be looking for PA, but in order to take some price action, I want to see how price is approaching and see what demand, untested demand there is on the approach that I want consumed before I consider shorting. Okay, so you can see if I start looking at this area, you can see this is fairly well tested area. Okay, price left this area with momentum, but we've had two tests, not necessarily tested this source, but that source is also tested this area here. So there's something that really stands out within this area. Price gets down here, then obviously this is the start, the immediate move up. So I would be wary of it from that perspective. But what is untested is this wick here. So the way I would mark that demand would be along there like that. So these are tests of this demand. That is a test of that demand, but that I don't count as particularly strong, so I wouldn't be that concerned with it. Okay, then if we move up again, I'm just looking at demand where price left with good momentum, and has it been tested? You can see yes, that's been tested, but price left this with good momentum. Okay, had a wick there, but that is a deep test, so I wouldn't be overly concerned about that. But I would note that we did leave with good momentum, so there was still decent demand strength at the source of this area. Okay, then we have obviously this area, and this is untested. We've had the immediate retest, but not like a proper retest like this one. So this price left this with even better momentum than this area and than this area. So this is, for me, the first untested demand. We've had the immediate retest, but price left it with good momentum, and it hasn't been tested yet. Okay, and you can see price came down to this area, so you'd actually include. You can see there's former decision points up there. Okay, but price hasn't come close to testing this source, so that for me is untested demand. So when I'm looking to short, unless I can get value to that area, and obviously depending on how far I'm running it, like am I looking to run it on a weekly time frame? That's not really my style. I'm looking for just reactions. But for me, that is a kind of a red alert area in terms of I need, unless I can get value trading into that area, I want that to be likely or fully consumed before I consider shorting. Okay, at the moment. So I will mark that on there. Okay, now we can see price reacted off these decision points. Then we had another strong momentum break, but then we had a retest. But again, just like this area here, the retest was very strong. Okay, and this is where we're coming up to the decision points now. Okay, so this is where I'm thinking, what do I need to short? And obviously, consuming this supply this demand is number one priority. And also, when I'm looking short, I want to see signs of selling strength. Obviously, if a supply is strong and stronger than demand, then you can't hide that. You should see liquidity gaps, like quick movement of price. So I want to see some sort of selling strength before I even consider PA. So if you look at price comes up here, we have the selling strength, but it's back in demand. So this is the test of the demand, but then left with good buying again. So that's a slight concern, because even though it would have consumed this, it's a full test of this area, it still had very strong demand left. Okay, we come back. Now we have a pretty weak, we're compressing up in a kind of flag-like manner. We have a move down. This time we react higher up, and this is like the dynamic nature of supply and demand. We had a deep test there, so sure, we should go down lower. No, we don't. Price left this area with good momentum. It's obviously created new demand within here because price has reacted down here. Okay, so on H1, if you follow this, looking for selling strength, we have selling strength down here, but again, we have the buying strength that comes off it. There's nothing until you get to here. Okay, and this is, draw a line along here. You can see this is the third time back now to this area. It should be getting weaker. We've had the buying follow through up to the edge of the lower zone that I marked up. But obviously that buying strength hasn't followed through, and now we've got some selling strength. You can see that how price reacts to this area, and you can see there's no very limited reaction up. The third time back to this area, if you look at what I consider location history, and this is obviously the better time to short than this area, than this, okay? But obviously we still have the problem of this untested demand, so if I short there, I'm trading straight into demand, okay? And this is kind of, if I was getting to this area, then I would be zooming in now. I wouldn't be looking to trade H1 on here because I'm more likely to see, I want to see this demand consumed, whether there's two ways of doing that. Either wait for it to be consumed and trade it on the retest, or trade when you see a lack of buying strength versus selling strength, and you kind of get to the point where you expect it to be consumed or it's likely consumed. So it's slightly riskier, but obviously you're going to get higher value. Okay, so obviously I'm not going to do that on H1. I'd do it on a lower time frame, but that's kind of my H1 evaluation of how I'd kind of look at things. But my preferred time frame would be M15. I'm sure there must be better opportunities along here. So this, H1 has set the scene in terms of the demand, and you can see it's much clearer on the H1. You look at this area here; it's very messy. It's very hard to see the key demand levels that need to be broken. When it's going back down here, so we've got the H1 picture, which is good, and then you can see this area much more clearly now. You can see the base that was formed here, which is you can see the history along there, and you can see how price left this area, and you can see why price reacted here, because you can see the decision point within here which has history along there, and that's something you can't see on the H1. You can't see that on H1. You can't see that history, so you can see why price reacted within here, and then basically what you've got is a new demand zone created. So it's something like that. Okay, so that's new demand that you need consumed. You can see we have a test and move away. Strong buying, but lack of follow through. Strong selling come down, but then we can't even make a deeper test again, so it still looks like the demand is pretty strong there. We have a very strong move again. This is where we make the new high, but again we can't break that high decision point, and this overall zone is holding. Then it's kind of doing nothing. But if you're looking at M15 now, and you're looking back up here, and you're looking for trade opportunities up here, then also you can see we've consume this whole area, so you would be looking maybe for this to be a supply cap, a new DBD. We've got this RBR consumed. We've got strong selling down here. You've got demand. The demand that led to the move, the immediate demand that needs to be broken, is this demand which led to the move to test the highest, the new higher high and the decision point at the top of the zone. You can see we've had a reaction off there, but then the buying strength has waned. As you can see, we've held this former decision point area, this former RBR here, is now holding the supply. So we've got price moving between supply and demand, deeper test. So this is, as the first potential area to short from. And remember, I said I'm only going to short into this area here, and then potentially this area here on the M15 if I can get value down to it. And the only way I can get value down to it is by zooming in. And you can see if you're shorting from around this area down to here, you've got a lot of value. Okay, so you can see prices meandering between demand and supply. So now you're looking at how price reacts to this demand. So I'm looking at deeper tests. I'm looking for immaterial rejections, i.e. not much of a rejection from it, which obviously shows there's a lack of demand left, a lack of buying strength, and looking for signs of selling strength. So that's how I kind of look at it. When I expect the demand, like preempting demand, to be consumed, and I breakout of that demand, I'm looking for low rejections, multiple tests, and some selling strength into it. Okay. So if I take those off, actually just mark that up. And you can see price comes back up. This is the rejection. It looks like true rejection. No, it's not. It gets immediately reversed. Bang. Then we have the break. Okay. So that's your opportunity to look for a short. You can see there's a lot of space down here. You've got the liquidity gap moving up. This is the main concern. There could be new demand created within there, but you could say you could always say there's new demand. But based on the M15 view here, this is obviously the first area, and this is going to be the third time back now. And you've got some signs of selling strength coming in for the first time. So now this is this, like I said on H1, this is the best prime time. If this demand is going to break, it's going to break soon. But in terms of shorting, the first area to short is on M15 is the break of this demand, and you can see that's done it here. So I would be looking just for immediate retest. If I was looking for, if I want to wait for some sort of PA, you're not going to get it. I mean, you have to decide on what PA you're looking for, obviously. But for me, when a demand has been consumed and you've got the selling strength and you've got the higher time frame zone holding, this is the first opportunity to sell. This is the first opportunity where the shorts look stronger than the longs in terms of selling strength, looks bigger than the buying strength, and we've just consumed multiple demand. We've consumed this demand here, okay, and price held it as supply. That shows selling strength. We've consumed this demand here. We've had, if you look at the rejections of this demand, not particularly strong rejection. It holds this area as a supply cap. We have one last exhaustion move after a full test, and it holds another lower low, and it holds this supply within this whole overall zone. And then we have the strong break, the strong selling strength, and then you can see this is just compression in a bear flag scenario. So that's just a bear flag essentially for another move lower, and we expect it to move through this area pretty damn well. So I would just be shorting on the immediate retest. Ain't got time, unless unless I'm going to zoom in and look at M5, M1, but for the purpose of this video I'm not going to do that. So the immediate retest is there. Stop loss go above here. If price starts getting above this area and a deeper test of this supply, I suppose I could put it above this whole supply, because obviously that should hold really, rather than just this decision point. So yeah, above this overall zone then, because that's just a test of this zone, and that's kind of the supply cap you're expecting to hold. But I'm actually pretty aggressive with my stop losses in terms of I look for tight ones, and on situations like this I don't expect much drawdown. So and you can see price comes down, react to this form of supply within here, but the selling's too strong, we come down. So this is my FLS on this time frame, okay, but we know it's a third time back, so I'm not just going to take all profit. FLS job done. It's a third time back. We've got the first sign of selling strength, so this is the best chance price should have to break this area. So I want to see how price does react. I know that any retest, this area should hold. You can see the decision point along there, so I won't cover it up, but you can see that's where price reacted. So that's kind of the overall zone. And again, I might be zooming in a bit on this when I get to this stage to really watch the PA, so I can see as much information as possible. But we know this area should hold, so my stop loss will be moved above here, and I might have taken some partial profit. And then you're watching the price action here. You can see we've got rejection, but each rejection is met by stronger rejection on the sell side. So each buy side rejection of here is basically just an exhaustion move, and we had the strong selling rejection come back in. And these are very obviously deeper tests of demand where we couldn't manage it. These previous two times in terms of price was quickly rejected, and we had the follow through. This time we've got no follow through. It's just basically price consuming the demand and picking up sell orders back up here. So if you look at that PA, compare it to these two times, add in the fact that we've got the selling strength for the first time and the fact with the third time back, on the balance of probabilities, what's likely to happen next, price is likely to fall. Okay, so if this probability it's going to drop is you can't quantify it exactly, can you? But I'd look at that and say, well, I've got about a 70% chance of it dropping from there. Obviously, that's where that's where I could potentially take another trade. If the probabilities is in my favour, then the expectancies are in my favour, and therefore I want to take a trade. Price action isn't about waiting for definitive things to happen all the time necessarily. Okay, it's just the way I think about things. It's more about what is price telling me, and is it telling me with enough probability that it warrants taking a trade. And it's certainly not going to be a case of I only want it when I'm 100% confident, because obviously you never get that, or 90% confidence. But it's when the expectancies are in my favour, I'm going to get involved. Okay, so I'm going to look at this. When am I going to try and take a trade? I'm not going to take it up there because I'm not going to take the retracement up here because I still want to see this get rejected, because this at the time when this forms is obviously buying strength. It gets strongly rejected, there's no follow through, we've had deeper tests, we've got the selling strength, we've got the third time back. It's going to go now, but I'm going to wait. I'm not going to short it here because obviously this is the bigger H1 demand. We haven't got too much value into there unless it's a very quick scalp, and if I was looking for a very quick scalp I'd be looking at M1 for an M1 entry on the pure breakout and an M1 stop loss. But for the purpose of this I'm only looking at M15. So on M15 there's no way really, unless you want to put take it on the break and put a stop loss above here, but you might get just 1R down to there. But on the M15 I don't think there's too much value if you're short from up here. Shorting down here as well, I think it's better to hold on to that trade, move your stop loss above this decision point, see if we can get down. And obviously this is the big thing. This is the bigger H1 demand, but we've got a decent short in play from up here. So now obviously you can see the spikes down here on that immediate retest, so we want to see how price, we've got the selling strength to come into it, so this is going to be the key area now. It's not going to shoot straight through, it's pretty unlikely to do that. Pretty obvious because this is not, this is essentially the FTB to it. You can see the key areas to break are kind of down there on these lows. So we've had on the first time back to it, we've had a very deep test. That's good for the short side of things. We had a very deep test. We get the rejection, which is expected. Let me delete that. Don't need that on there anymore. You can see what we do is we just consolidate and we just do this. Now this is obviously getting to Friday night, so I'm just ignoring the fact that this is obviously Friday night and just like looking at the PA. Okay, so we have like a pennant or whatever you want to call them, triangle forming, just consolidation. So we're going to break out obviously in one direction. We want to look for signs that we're going to break in the short direction and then look to take our second trade, or if we're not in a trade already, our first trade, because this is obviously the H1 demand, the key demand to get broken, and we want to trade it down to that source area. The next untested demand I marked up on the H1. So how would I look to do this? Again, I would look for selling strength and signs of demand consumption. Now this one's trickier because obviously the consolidation is forming above this demand, so you've had the deeper test but now you're having shallower tests. So in terms of taking a break from here, that's risky because you can't see any selling strength in here. It's just basically going selling, buying, and swapping in both directions. So you have to wait for the breakout in my view, unless again you're zooming in closer. But if you take a short from here, it's kind of risky because you don't quite know what price will do back up here. So the more obvious thing is going to be the break and pullback. Okay, you can see we have the break, we have the pullback. No point hanging around. You've got to take it on the touch, because you're not going to get any PA off there. It's either going to not work or it's going to work, but you're not going to get any PA around here that's going to help you from a confidence perspective, give more, well, from an information perspective, give you more information as to what is likely to happen. So you just have to take it and say, well, if this is a true short breakout, then this DBD's got to hold. Okay, it's got to hold, and that's all the information you need. Okay, it's got to hold. We had the second deeper test of this area. Either price is going to shoot back up and then this whole area is going to hold and we're going to make a higher test, or this is going to work out and we're going to go to that next H1 demand. You see it does. That's your second trade there. Shoot straight down. I need to zoom out a bit now and look at what the next area was. Well, then I didn't mark it up, but this is the one I was saying was tonight, that this within here, this wick within here is the source of this move, and the source of this move hasn't been tested yet. Obviously this area has. So, and I said that this is something to note, but this was a full test of this area, and it was the FTB test, but it left with good momentum. So it's something I would have marked up and I would be noting. If price pauses, started getting strongly rejected from there, then obviously that would be a concern. Okay. So that's the pullback. Nothing to really do. We have a rejection. Price doesn't always move as smoothly as you'd like it, or as you get lower time frames. It meanders around. Obviously, we are getting late at night on a Friday up here, and then obviously the Sunday open, so it's never going to be particularly smooth. But you can see that DBD within here still holds and come down, and this is the area to be wary of. But again, price doesn't stop there, so that's good. And then we come down straight to that H1 demand. And so far we've got rejected and we've held this DBD. So now this whole area is kind of done for me now from what the time frames I watch. But if you're looking at this weekly supply and you're looking to go further down, obviously you'd be looking at this demand within here. There's a gap here in this horrible area. This demand, you've got this form of supply, and you've got this demand within here. So you'd have to watch the price action and see if we can get consumption of this demand. But from in terms of the trading from the rejection and how I look at things, they are the two most obvious trade opportunities in my view. Then 15 from the retest up here, or the compression, but obviously you don't know it's going to compress, so that's a danger. If it might just go straight down. So if you're waiting for PA, you can move out, lose out when you don't need any more information. So that's the one trade, and the second trade was a pullback to this DBD within here. Okay. So trade 1 would have been there with the stop loss, as I said, well, either above there or above this overall zone. Trade 2 would have been that test with just a stop loss above that zone, and then obviously this was the overall H1 determined target. So that's how I would look at it. Plenty of value in that. I mean, it's not exactly how I trade, but looking at weekly zones as such. But that's how I would look at the PA, and hopefully that makes sense. It's a bit more advanced stuff that I've not discussed in public. It's more in my forum, but and obviously it's all in hindsight, so it's always a little bit easier, but it's more about explaining the concepts of how I look for PA, and this type of approach is how I look at things on a much lower time frame, day in, day out.